Hi everybody, I'm Ryan. Over the course of the past few weeks, we have been examining Lotus Field / Hidden Strings combo. We've looked at the overall strategy of the deck, the card choices in the deck, how to sideboard against the top 10 most popular decks in Pioneer, flex slots and different builds in the deck, and nuances and interesting play patterns in the deck. So this video is to combine all of those together into one video, one big deep dive. Enjoy. So this is Lotus Field combo in Pioneer. Now what this deck is effectively trying to do is simple. Basically, they're attempting to capitalize on the mana that Lotus Field produces by untapping it and tapping it a whole bunch with things like Hidden Strings and Vizier of Tumbling Sands, and Pour Over Pages for that matter if you have multiple Lotus Fields, to draw a bunch of cards, get a bunch of mana, to eventually either emerge an ultimatum for a bunch of cards that do really similar things in order to grab Approach the Second Sun, cast Approach the Second Sun, and then cast Dark Petition again, or draw Approach the Second Sun out of our deck and win the game. That's a long and short of what we're attempting to do. Now, the way to get there, it can be kind of hard. So we're going to go over all of these cards. A lot of the cards in our mana base are just like mana producing lands. We have Boseiju and Otawara as spell lands, which are kind of cool because we can grab them with Archdruid's Charm. But the things I really wanted to focus on were Lotus Field and Thespian Stage. So Lotus Field, it is hexproof, which is nice. It can't be destroyed. It enters tapped, and when it enters, sacrifice 2 lands, and you can tap to add 3 mana of any one color. So the default mode of this deck is turn 1, play a land, turn 2, play a land, maybe cast a spell, turn 3, Lotus Field, sack the 2 lands, and now I have this thing that I can untap and get a bunch of mana from. However, you can then play Thespian Stage, where you can pay 2 mana and have it become a copy of target land, and you can have it become a copy of Lotus Field without sacrificing lands, because when it becomes a copy, it doesn't necessarily enter. And there are other ways to kind of like cheat about Lotus Field. So we can search it up with Sylvan Scrying. If we already have a Lotus Field, we're probably searching up Thespian Stage because there's less cost into putting it on the battlefield. And we can search it up with Archdruid's Charm. And Archdruid's Charm is just like a decent utility card and being able to exile artifacts and enchantments, especially since artifacts and enchantments are the cards that are good against our deck, to make sure that we, always have these lands that are required for the beginning of our combo. In addition, we're playing Strict Proctor. That's a 2-mana 1/3 with flying. Whenever a permanent entering causes a triggered ability to trigger, counter that ability unless the controller plays 2. What's kind of interesting about Strict Proctor is this card neuters what the opponent is doing, in addition to making it so Lotus Field doesn't trigger. Even if you have the mana, you can just choose not to pay it. Oh no, it's countered, which means I don't sack any lands, which is very, very powerful, and people are really realizing that. We're also playing Soul Partition, mostly to be able to deal with permanents that neuter our deck, things like Damping Sphere and whatnot. Fae of Wishes, that we can grab with Emergent Ultimatum as just another way that we can grab Approach from the Second Sun from our graveyard, possibly multiple times if we have time to play it and return it to our hand and whatnot. Once we have that Lotus Field and maybe a Thespian Stage on the battlefield that has copied Lotus Field, we have Hidden Strings in order to tap and untap these lands. We have Vizier of Tumbling Sands in order to profit mana and also be able to churn through our deck. In addition, after we've used some of these cards, we can Ball Again Recovery them back to our hand, which is also very nice. We're playing a Leer, mostly to grab with Emergent Ultimatum, but it allows us to just do everything from our graveyard again, and also when we do that, it can't be countered. Pour Over Pages, I would argue, is the most important card of our deck. Draw 3 cards, untap 2 lands, and discard a card. If we have 2 Lotus Field effects, then we profit 1 mana to drawing 3 cards and discarding a single card, which is excellent, because especially since we need to be hitting certain cards like Emergent Ultimatum and Dark Petition, or maybe even Ball Again Recovery or whatever, in order to win the game. So Pour Over Pages is absolutely excellent. We just churn through our deck. Dark Petition I've already talked about. Emergent Ultimatum is another very, very good card. You search your library for up to 3 monocolored cards with different names and exile them. An opponent chooses one of those cards, shuffle that card into your library. You can cast the other cards without paying their mana cost and exile Emergent Ultimatum. So the cards you're normally going to be grabbing with Emergent Ultimatum is some combination of Omniscience, Dark Petition, Leer, and Fae of Wishes. Sometimes if some of them are in the graveyard already, we'll grab a Ball Again Recovery as well, or maybe even Pour Over Pages. But the goal of this Emergent Ultimatum is to create a ultimatum pile that your opponent is dead no matter what they choose to shuffle back in. So for example, if I have a ridiculous amount of mana and I go Emergent Ultimatum, let's go Omniscience, Dark Petition, Leer. right? They can shuffle Omniscience in, and Dark Petition and Leer get cast for free. With Dark Petition, I just grab Approach, Leer, put on the battlefield, cast these hidden strings from my graveyard or whatever, and be able to get that mana back and cast all these other spells from my graveyard. Dark Petition for that Approach, cast a bunch of spells, cast Dark Petition from my graveyard again, grab Approach from my library, cast it, we win, right? Or something to that effect. As you play more Lotus Field, the piles that you're going to make become more and more important, and I would argue are one of the harder parts about this deck. And then, like I already mentioned, Omniscience is mostly just to be able to grab with Emergent Ultimatum to make it miserable. These piles really, really difficult. Something to note about Omniscience, though, that I'll probably mention in my nuances video as well, is that only spells cast from your hand you can play without paying the mana cost, which means that the cards that you cast from your graveyard with Leer aren't free. As far as our sideboard goes, a lot of this is a wish board, meaning that sometimes, especially post board, you're going to run into hate cards that mean that you probably can't combo, but you can still grab cards with Fae of Wishes and Dark Petition that can win the game for you without casting Approach twice. So let's kind of go over these things. So Silence is really good to side in against counterspell decks. You can, before you attempt a combo, you can just like cast Silence. And then if your opponent doesn't counter that Silence, then you can just combo off, or it just eats a counterspell. 9 Lives is really good against aggressive decks and decks that you just need way more time against. Temporary Lockdown, again, but mostly aggressive decks that have a lot of permanents that are cost 2 or less. Depopulate is just a solid board wipe that you can grab. We already talked about Approach. Sphinx of the Final Word is very good against counterspell decks. It can't be countered itself and means that other things can't be countered. And also you can't really answer it. And the mana doesn't really matter because we have the Lotus Fields. And so either grabbing or siding in Sphinx of the Final Word is very powerful. Glistening Deluge is a board wipe. Path of Peril is a board wipe. Voyaging Satyr is really fun because it sort of acts like a 2-mana Vizier that we can't cycle, where we can just untap the land. Very good against decks that we kind of need to be sort of turbo against. Dragonlord Jamoka, spell can't be countered, opponent can't cast spells during your turn. Just a really, really good lifelink finisher, and is very good against counterspells. Zakama, another very good finisher, especially since when you cast it, you untap all the lands you control, which means the Lotus Fields. So really good against like creature-based decks, lets you gain a bunch of life pretty much immediately and just win the game. And then we're playing another Emergent Ultimatum if we're in a situation where we need to like Dark Petition for another Emergent Ultimatum. We can grab it from our sideboard. So this is the Lotus Field combo deck in Pioneer. And before we jump into how to sideboard against the top 10 most popular decks, I wanted to talk about each card in the sideboard and the roles of each card in the sideboard. Silence is for decks that can interact with your combo after you've started going off. So I'm talking things like counterspell decks and stuff like that. 9 Lives is really good against aggressive decks, especially decks that can kill you faster than you can combo on average. Temporary Lockdown, really good against aggressive decks as well. Again, you might notice aggressive decks are a rough matchup for us. Same thing with Depopulate, allows us to wipe the board unconditionally, especially if there's things that Temporary Lockdown can't get. Approach to the Second Sun is mostly a wish board target. That's how it eventually kills, by grabbing the Dark Petition. Sphinx of the Final Word, very good against counterspell decks. Sort of allows us to go off without having to worry about counter magic. Glistening Deluge, really good against these aggressive decks as well. Same thing with Path of Peril, needing to really stop our opponent from doing things. Voyaging Satyr is very strong against decks that are fast as well. If we need to turbo out our combo. Dragonlord Jamoka, also very good at stopping our opponents from stopping our combo, especially during our turn. Also having lifelink is very powerful and can just be like a game ender against the fast decks. Zakama, you can Zakama and essentially win the game, especially if your opponent is playing creature decks. And then we have an extra Emergent Ultimatum as a wish target or a Dark Petition target if we need to grab it from our sideboard because we're unable to draw it from the main deck. As another side note, if you want to learn about this deck as a whole, I did a deck tech on it that was posted last week. You should totally check that out. But without further ado, the most popular deck in Pioneer is Rakdos Midrange. Against Rakdos Midrange, we're bringing in Temporary Lockdown because a lot of their hate cards, Temporary Lockdown can actually hit. We're bringing in Depopulate to slow down the aggression. And then we're just going to be shaving on Strict Proctor since it's really easy for them to answer. And there's really no need in us like trying to rush out the mana from Lotus Field. So this is sideboard against Rakdos Midrange. I would also like to say that as a whole, you aren't going to be sideboarding too much because remember, you're a combo deck. we have alternate plans, but those alternate plans are often going to be just grabbed with as like wish targets. Anyway, the second most popular deck is It Phoenix? Against Is It Phoenix, we are bringing in Silence, and we are bringing in Voyaging Satyr, just so we can kind of turbo it out, because Is It Phoenix can be pretty fast in a lot of different ways. And then similar to Rakdos, we are going to be shaving on Strict Proctor, just because it doesn't like stop anything what your opponent's doing, because Strict Proctor is one of those cards that helps us, but is also mostly being played as main deck hate. And so we're going to be taking that out in the South sideboard against Is It Phoenix. The third most popular deck is Rakdos Aggro. Against Rakdos Aggro, we're going to be bringing in 9 lives. We're going to be bringing in Temporary Lockdown, Depopulate, Path of Peril, the Voyaging Satyr, just to go even faster. And again, because Strict Proctor doesn't actually neuter anything in our opponent's deck, we're going to be cutting the Strict Proctor. I'm also a big fan in bringing in Zakama, just so we can cast Zakama. We're going to be shaving on Emerge of Ultimatum, because I'd rather just like try to interact with our opponent. Shaving on Pour Over the Pages. And because we're shaving on Emerge and Ultimatum, I like cutting on Essence as well. This high sideboard against Rakdos Aggro. The fourth most popular deck is Jund Sacrifice. Against Jund Sac, we're bringing in Temporary Lockdown. It's just genuinely very, very good against the deck. And we're going to be shaving on an Emergent Ultimatum and a Bala Ged Recovery. Giving up on a little bit of a consistency with our combo for interaction, I think, is totally fine, because we need to keep everything else. Especially keeping in Strict Proctor, because it stops the cat combo, which is very scary. The fifth most popular deck is Selesnya Company. Against Selesnya Company, we are bringing in Depopulate and Glistening Deluge and Path of Peril. And I'm a fan of Zakama again against these creature decks like we talked about. And we're going to be shaving on a lot of the consistency in our combo like we've done before against these creature decks. I'm going to be shaving an Emergent Ultimatum, 2 Pour Over the Pages, 1 Omniscience, and that's how we sideboard against Selesnya Company. The sixth most popular deck is Nivtalite. Against Nivtalite, I like bringing in Silence, both because sometimes they bring in cards to interact with us during our turn, but also if we do this in response to a Bring to Light, they can't cast the card they grab, which is awesome. Then we're going to be bringing in both Dragonlord Jamoka and Zakama, and similar to how we've done before, we're just going to shave on the combo, consistency, and that's how we sideboard against Bring to Light. The seventh most popular deck is the Mirror Match. In the Mirror Match, before we even talk about bringing something, we have to bring out Strict Proctor, because it helps our opponent as well. So we can't have that card in our deck. We're bringing in Silence, because it can kind of interrupt and act as sort of counter magic in our opponent's turn. And we're bringing in Voyaging Satyr, just to sort of turbo out and to stop the Strict Proctor stuff. And there's nothing else in our sideboard that we like really want. And so I'm just bringing in a Zakama as a finisher. So it's how I sideboard in the mirror. The eighth most popular deck is Azorius Control. Against Azorius Control, obviously we're bringing in Silence, so they have a harder time interacting with us. Dragonlord Jamoka in the main deck is important just so we can cast it and it just sort of do its thing. And then we're bringing in the Voyaging Satyr just to go a little bit quicker, because we're going to be cutting the Strict Proctor because it doesn't do anything to our opponent's deck. And so this high sideboard against Azorius Control. The ninth most popular deck is Gruul Aggro. Against the Gruul Aggro deck, we're bringing in Temporary Lockdown, Depopulate, and Path of Peril. I'm also a fan of Voyaging Satyr just to turbo things out a little bit more. Again, also a big fan of Zakama just as like an awesome finisher in the main deck. And they're going to be shaving on consistency in our combo like we've done before, because we really need to interact or we just die. Out of Bala Ged Recovery, and we'll shave on a Strict Proctor. So that's how I sideboard against Gruul Aggro. And the 10th most popular deck is 5-color Idiomatic Incarnation. Against 5-color Idiomatic, I'm just shipping it back. I think this matchup is insane, and Strict Proctor like neuters what our opponent's doing, and it's just so good. So we're just shipping it back. I love it. These are the cards in the Lotus combo deck that are stock, that are you essentially like kind of have to play if you're playing this version of Lotus combo. So notice the main deck is figured out up to 57 cards, and the sideboard has 9 stock cards. So really we're looking for cards to fill the 3 slots in the main deck that are missing and the 6 slots in the sideboard that are missing. So what cards could fill those slots? Well, these cards could fill those slots. So in the 3 slots in the main deck, you have 6 cards to choose from. And in the 6 slots in the sideboard, you have 12 cards to choose from. So let's talk about why you would select any of these cards. Now in the main deck, you could play another Soul Partition to join the 2 Soul Partition that are currently stock, just for additional answer to not only aggro, but hate. It's very good against any permanent that can stop our combo. So things like Damping Sphere, maybe Rest in Peace, what have you. Magebane Lizard, maybe. Temporary Lockdown, very good against these aggressive things. Also answers a lot of those permanents that we're afraid of, like I mentioned. Path of Peril mostly is for the aggressive decks, just a different, more permanent way to answer it. There are 2 Balaged recoveries that are not stock. There's currently only 1 being played in the totally stock list. But you could play number 2 and number 3 to not only have more lands, but focus more on the combo. And another Dark Petition can help out with that combo. And so you're going to select 3 of these 6 cards. And then of these 12 cards, you're going to select 6 in the sideboard. So you can pick 9 lives. 9 lives is a really good way to give yourself a little bit more time, especially against the aggressive decks. We've already talked about Temporary Lockdown. Day of Judgment is, again, a permanent, more widespread way to wipe away creatures. Decent against mid-range decks that play cards that Temporary Lockdown can't necessarily hit. Leyline of Sanctity is solid, especially against like Thoughtseize effects or Thought Distortion or whatever. Mystical Dispute for being able to fight on the stack against the blue decks. Glistening Deluge, specifically really good against Selesnya Company, which have a lot of hate cards for us. I've already talked about Path of Peril. Niv Mizzet Perrin, I think that's how you say that word, is a 6-mana 5/5. The spell can't be countered. When you draw a card, it deals 1 damage to any target. When a player casts an instant sorcery spell, you draw a card. So obviously very good against decks that play a lot of instant sorceries. So like Control or Phoenix or whatever. By doing their thing, we get to fill our hand and eventually combo, and it's a finisher in and of itself. And then Dragon Lord Jamoka. The spell can't be countered, has flying lifelink, and opponents can't cast spells during your turn. Very good against decks that want to play at instant speed or fight what you're doing on the stack. So again, you're going to select 6 of these 12 cards to play in the sideboard, and you're going to select 3 of these 6 cards to play in the main deck to join these 57 cards in the main deck. Let me fix this. And these 9 cards in the sideboard, and then you have your very own modified stock version of Lotus combo. And I'm going to start off with more obvious ones and then move on to less obvious ones. First off is make sure you're tapping the right colors on your Lotus field so you can eventually cast the cards that you plan on casting. You kind of have to plan out your turn very often. More than once have I been playing against a Lotus field combo player and they can't cast the Emergent Ultimatum in their hand because they just tapped for wrong colors. That being said, if you aren't really sure about your line and you don't know what colors to tap, blue is always a pretty safe choice, but really you should be thinking about it. Remember, Archdruid's Charm can be a part of lines that go multiple phases. So if you want access to your graveyard, you can grab Archdruid's Charm. You can play Archdruid's Charm to grab Leer to then be able to cast these cards in your graveyard, or maybe a more common line is Archdruid's Charm to grab Fae of Wishes to eventually be able to grab the Approach to the Second Sun out of the sideboard. Just Archdruid's Charm is almost always a multiple step process, especially when you're grabbing creatures out of your deck. There's a lot of ways to combo kill with the deck. The most common one is making a bunch of mana through untapping the Lotus fields, in some fashion, Emergent Ultimatum into even more mana and grabbing Approach to the Second Sun from the sideboard and then just like casting it twice. But if you play Chandra Hope's Beacon, there's some other ways to combo. Specifically, if you have like Omniscient, Chandra Hope's Beacon, and 3 Balaged Recovery is a loop and infinite mana, which is awesome. It's remember post-sideboard, it's totally okay to cast Vizier of Tumbling Sands to be able to untap your Lotus field like on a whim, because your opponents are going to sideboard out some number or sometimes all of their removal, and having it on the battlefield is kind of just better. That being said, it's almost always incorrect to do that in game 1 because they have the removal in the deck and you should probably just cycle it. If you happen to have sideboarded out one of the Balaged recoveries or have it exiled and are playing the Chandra version, there's actually a way to combo with Chandra as well, with 2 Balaged recoveries and Ottawa Sorin City to like bounce the Chandra and be able to replay it. This one is not infinite mana, but it can get you to 20 damage. Remember, you can cipher Hidden Strings onto Strict Proctor or Vizier, especially onto the Strict Proctor. It happens a lot. And speaking of Hidden Strings, remember it can tap down your opponent's lands too, especially if you're afraid of counter magic or something like that. Tap down your opponent's lands, go to second main phase, and then kill them while your opponent can't interact with you. When you cast Emergent Ultimatum, normally your pile is going to be Omniscience, Dark Petition, and Pour Over the Pages. However, sometimes if you're afraid of not being able to fully combo and your opponent has a really good board presence, it is correct to go pour over the pages Dark Petition, Sunfall, or a board wipe or something to interact. And then lastly, to go back to Strict Proctor, generally you don't want to run out Strict Proctor on turn 2. You really want to be able to combo it with Lotus Field. So try to play Strict Proctor the same turn you're going to play Lotus Field normally on turn 3. If you liked this deep dive into Lotus Field Hidden Strings combo, please be sure to like and subscribe. Check me out on social medias. Links are above me and in the description. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.